Now to our moderator for the day, Jarrett Murphy, who's the executive editor and publisher of City Limits, and we're truly grateful that he's joined us today. The other candidates were around. Well, I don't know.
Okay.
Where's Willie's son?
Well, thank you, Bobby, and thanks everybody for coming. We're about 2 months out from the New York City mayoral primary, and we've discussed already so many important issues that are going to affect the city for years to come, whether it's stop and frisk policing or the plight of small businesses, whether it's bike lanes or the crisis facing public housing. But issues affecting the aging are unique in that they literally are going to affect pretty much all of us. We're all going to get older. In fact, we'll all be a little bit older by the time this event is over. I know I will be. And hopefully, probably most of us are going to get old or reach the point where we call ourselves aged or senior citizens or elderly or whatever term you want to use for that part of life where you're supposed to be respected as an elder. Senior, that's another one. And if we mature. And when that happens, as it probably will for most of us, we're going to have a lot of company because New York City is getting grayer. The population of people over age 60 has grown much faster than the general population for the past 10 years. And that's going to raise a lot of issues for people who are themselves seniors or mature and for the rest of the city. And so I'm very glad that we're going to have a chance to talk about that today. I want to say that we're in the midst of a very intense, very important, and as the candidates on stage would tell you, very long mayoral campaign. And in the midst of that, candidates face very difficult, sometimes painful decisions about how to spend their time. And so while we are disappointed that some people couldn't join us today, we respect that they have a lot of demands on their time, but we're so grateful that we have been joined or will be joined by the people you see on stage. So I don't know if Bobby would like me to proceed or if we should wait for other candidates to jump up. But I guess what I'll do is I will go through the introductions of people whom we expect to appear, and then we'll begin. First on the stage, of course, we're joined by Sal Albanese, a Democrat running for mayor. He was the New York City councilman for the 43rd District in Brooklyn from 1982 to 1998. And we're also joined by Republican John Katsimatidis, who is the CEO of Red Apple Group Supermarkets. Republican Liberal. Sorry. Can't forget the L that's next to the R. We'll also be joined, we believe, and I don't want to interrupt later on with introductions, so I'll do that now, by former Congressman Anthony Weiner, who represented the 9th Congressional District from 1999 to 2011. By Eric Salgado, who is the pastor of Iglesia Jovenes Cristianos Church, and also by Bill de Blasio, who is the city's public advocate. Mr. de Blasio has told us that he plans to, or he has to leave early after he arrives, so we'll get him for some portion of the morning. The format, I should just say, we're going to plan on doing 2 minutes per question for an answer from each candidate. We have a timekeeper in front who's going to warn us when there's 30 seconds left and tell us when there's no time left. I'm sorry, I've been told I have to talk louder. So each question will have 2 minutes for each candidate to answer, and then at my discretion, I'll allow rebuttals or retorts or angry responses, or I might ask some follow-ups. And we'll also have hopefully a longer conclusion at the end. And I should just mention, too, as a note to everybody, that this event is being recorded for posterity, so please, everybody, do everything in their power to make me look good. So let's begin with what's always the most important question, and it's about essentially money, but also about priorities. And we'll start with Mr. Albanese for this first question, and then the other candidates who are at the table will have a chance to respond. Over the course of the Bloomberg administration, there's been a lot of wrestling over funding for programs for the aging. The budget has been cut. There's been an argument year after year over what should be baselined and what should be restored. Every now and then there is a dispute about the role of member items, constituent and discretionary money from council members and what role that should or shouldn't play. When you are mayor, how will you approach funding for programs for the aging? If you plan to increase the budget, where will the money come from? Will you baseline it? And what role do you think member items should play? Mr. Albanese.
Thank you, and
thank all the organizations who are sponsoring this event. It's an important topic as the population ages in the city, or John and I are in the mature category, I want you to know. Maybe that's why we're here early. But there's no doubt that the city of New York and the country faces a large increase in the senior population, and we have to start planning for it. As mayor, I want to put together a comprehensive plan on how to address our aging population in terms of affordable housing, in terms of transportation, and all the essentials that are important to all of us as a city. We have almost over 1 million seniors in the city of New York, and I have to say that I've been in the private sector the last 15 years, and I'm very disappointed in the way the funding has been drastically cut across the board over the last 10, 12 years. I want a baseline senior program so that every single year, all the advocates have to go to City Hall literally begging that programs not be slashed. I think it's wrong. I think quality programs should continue to be funded, and we should also make it a priority. I mean, there's a lot of money in this town. We're a very wealthy city, and senior programs are not that expensive. So I want to make sure that we prioritize and make seniors a priority in the city. Stop giving away tax breaks to developers who don't need them, and use that money to help the people who have made this city a great place and this country a great place. People should age with dignity, and government should play a role in making sure that people have the basics. So I'm not a big fan of member items. I think they're not good for democracy, and I want to make sure that we baseline programs and they're adequately funded for our seniors.
Thank you, Mr. Albanese. Just want to welcome Public Advocate de Blasio to the event. And I just want to mention, if you have a cell phone, if you could please turn it off or silence it or throw it out or something. We don't want to hear it. I just did it to mine, so fair's fair. You have to do it to yours. The first question, Mr. de Blasio, was just about funding for programs for the aged, how you would approach it, whether you would baseline it, where the money would come from. But I think we're going to go to Mr. Katzimatidis and then to you for what will be a 2-minute response. Titus, sorry.
I'm going to defend his right to his pronunciation.
Thank you.
For a 2-minute response.
And whoever can't remember the name Katzimatidis, a lot of my friends have been calling me, oh, it must be the Cat Man. Thank you. Like I said, I'm a Republican liberal. I was a Democrat, but I'm a businessman. And the Democratic Party hasn't nominated a businessman to run for anything since 1888. I'm older than Sal. I'm going to be 65 in September. And I made it. I believe, I've been saying publicly on my liberal hat that my 2 priorities is to make sure we take care of our elderly and make sure we take care of the poor kids in poor neighborhoods. So the elderly has been one of my priorities, saying that you guys have worked hard all your lives. Society has promised you X, Y, and Z, and we should deliver. And that is my priority, that everyone in this room gets everything that was promised to you, because you deserve it. One of my other priorities has been that to make sure when we have hospital or ambulatory services around the city, I've made it a policy that wherever a patient is picked up by ambulance, they have to be able to get to a doctor within 10 minutes. Whether it's an emergency type situation or a hospital. If a hospital is not available in your area, we got to get you to a place where there is a doctor to help keep you alive until we get you to the hospital. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone who is here. For so many of you are the reason that seniors in this city get an opportunity to live a better life. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank Commissioner Lillian Barrios Paoli for all the great work that she does. Thank you. Just give her a round of applause. The first thing I want to say is, before you even talk about the DFTA budget, something I think much bigger. We need to create affordable housing for seniors in New York City because people are being forced out. I have a plan to create 200,000 units of affordable housing. It will take investing pension fund dollars. It will take literally requiring of the real estate industry that they give us affordability, which bluntly Bloomberg has not required. And it's time to demand that of the real estate industry because we need senior housing. It's as simple as that. And John made the point about hospitals. I am fighting to keep 2 hospitals open right now in Brooklyn that bluntly we're going to lose this summer if there isn't a public movement in this town to stop them. We're going to lose Interfaith and we're going to lose Long Island College Hospital, and that's going to hurt seniors deeply in those communities. We can't keep taking health care farther and farther and farther away from people who need it. So I respect how important DFTA's role is, but bluntly, where I'm going to focus is first on the creation of affordable housing and second on preserving health care for seniors and not seeing it whittled away time and time again. And by the way, one other thing, Mayor Bloomberg has not lifted a finger or said a word about hospital closures from St. Vincent's till today, not a word. And that's not leadership. On the DFTA budget, straight up, I believe in the work of DFTA. What I will do, I'm not going to say baseline, I want to be very straightforward. Whatever the number is, I'm going to put it forward as saying what I think the City of New York can afford. We're about to have a couple of years of fiscal difficulty, bluntly, because of all the open labor contracts. I'll put forward a number. I don't want to play the game with the council. I want to get rid of member items. I want a transparent process. I want community participatory budgeting. What the number I can achieve for DFTA, I will put it up front, and then there should be a public debate over whether it's the right number or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's welcome Congressman Weiner and Comptroller Liu. And we'll go to them in order of appearance. So, Mr. Weiner.
Thank you. Forgive me for being late. Look, if every program in the city was as efficient as DFTA senior centers, we'd be in the black every year. They don't cost a lot of money. The people that work there don't live high on the hog, especially the kosher ones. The volunteers sustain it. And I have to tell you that I learned this from personal experience. Some of you who know me from my district, I've told this story before when I first campaigned for city council. Some of you met my grandmother of blessed memory. When my grandfather passed away, my grandmother, who was this hyperactive, civic-minded, all kinds of activities, but they did it together, she went into a tailspin. And then she discovered her neighborhood senior center. In the final days of her life, her closest friends were the ones she made to the senior center. It was no longer, Anthony, how come you don't call me? It's Anthony, I'm too busy to talk. I'm going to Atlantic City. I got my class. I got my bridge club. I got my canasta club. I understand intuitively something that I argued for in Washington. And that is, health care in this country is not just something we do for the people who are getting it, it's something we do for society. When we take good care of seniors, they don't go to institutions, they don't go to hospitals, they don't get sick, they feel better, and I have to tell you, it's cheap. I'll give you an example. If we were to spend 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 bucks to go into a senior's home and install a handrail by their shower, you know, 40% of all hospitalizations are slip and falls. That is way cheaper than thousands and thousands of dollars in a hospital emergency room. And I want to echo something that Bill de Blasio said and something that he got arrested for yesterday. If we close 13 law firms in this city, would we not make a peep? If we closed 13 publishing houses, would we not make a peep? But we closed 13 hospitals in this city, and the mayor simply threw up his hand and said, hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Well, that's going to end in a Weiner administration. I'm going to talk to people about the success of Medicare and say something else. Just like I argued in Washington for a single-payer health plan that I called Medicare for all Americans, now I'm proposing a single-payer health plan for New York City that we can call Medicare for all New Yorkers.
Mr. Liu.
Thank you very much, Jared. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to see everybody here. It's a wonderful turnout, and we would expect no less from our seniors, really the people who made our city great and the community, the leaders of our community for so many years and decades. This is a discussion that is long coming. We have had so many candidate forums, and yet none of them really focused on the issues that affect the fastest growing segment of our population. And so yes, well, one person agrees. The fastest growing part of our population are senior citizens. And we have many people who are retiring, people who are now living longer. God bless all of you. And we have to make sure that the city is taking care of our elderly. Now, the question of funding for DFTA is a very serious one. $50 million reduction in recent years. $50 million less services for the most important people in our city. That is not right. That has to be reversed. And I've long called for getting rid of this ridiculous budget dance. I appreciate all the seniors every year coming in hundreds down to City Hall. Bobby Sagman and all the leaders here bringing them down. And, you know, it's fun to see all of you. But it's always like, it always happens to be on the hottest day of the year with the sun beating down and or raining, but when it's raining, it's still hot. And you know, I would like for seniors to have to come down to City Hall to advocate for legislation that is necessary to make New York City better, but not come down every year to take part of this ridiculous budget dance to restore cuts that never should have been proposed in the first place. So let's baseline the budget and bring it back to what the budget was several years ago. And then finally, in addition to the budget for DFTA, we've got to talk about other services, because it's not just DFTA for the senior citizens. Every single agency in New York City needs to be paying attention to the needs of seniors, whether it be Department of Transportation, allowing seniors to be able to walk safely and get safely from one place to another, to the NYPD and investigation of elder abuse, all sorts of issues that the growing population of seniors in our city needs. And it's DFTA that can be the conduit to coordinate all agencies. But
Thank you,
it certainly
Mr. Liu.
doesn't end at DFTA. Thank you very much.
Our second question, and for this one we'll begin with Mr. de Blasio, move down, and then back to Mr. Albanese. As the city has grayed, one problem that has cropped up with increasing frequency is the problem of elder abuse. According to a recent report by the state, the actual rate of elder abuse might be up to 24 times what is reported to police and social service agencies. Oftentimes it is psychological, financial, sometimes it's physical, it's always cruel. How will your administration address that problem?
It's a very painful problem, and obviously it's not one that does not get discussed publicly enough. You know, our society has a way of sweeping under the rug the things that are hardest to look at, whether it's child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence. But I think the solution is similar in all cases. You have to intervene. It is the role, it is the responsibility of the city government, and sometimes that means folks from DFTA, and sometimes that means the police, and it can mean other agencies as well. But we have to have an interventionist approach. You know, in a very different vein, I was the chairman of the General Welfare Committee in the City Council, and I was chairman when we lost Nick's Mary Brown, which was one of the most tragic and deeply felt cases of child abuse in the city's history. And what I saw is that there was a moment of awakening where people realized, if you think someone may be in danger, it's all of our responsibility to say something, to uncover it, to say it out loud, and not to wonder, well, I don't want to get involved, maybe I shouldn't, maybe it's not happening. We can't afford to be passive. It's really all of our responsibility. And so I would approach this with the same kind of energy that I think, to the credit of the Bloomberg administration, I don't always give them credit. You know, I often have things I have to disagree with them on. But in this case, when that tragedy occurred, there was a very comprehensive effort to tell people all over the city, you have to report what you're seeing, and then there was a clear follow-up with city agencies actually getting involved with families where there was a problem. I want to do that same approach in terms of elder abuse. First, we have to demystify. Second, we have to tell people, every single New Yorker has a responsibility. If they think, you know, if you see something, say something. We say it about terrorism. We should say it about elder abuse as well. And then when it is reported in, the city has to follow up quickly, because we can't take the chance that someone could be fundamentally hurt because of inaction. So it's about a responsive city government constantly communicating with its people.
Thank you.
I agree 100%. We have an obligation to keep our senior citizens safe, whether it's abuse from a family member, whether it's abuse at a hospital or a senior citizen center. We have to create the right hotlines to be able to have people report it and be able to fix it. Our senior citizens, like I said, worked all their lives. They don't deserve to be abused financially or personally. I'm 100% behind that. Thank you.
This is a growing problem, and it's, you know, when only 4% of the cases of elder abuse are actually being reported, it's something we have to pay attention to, and it's a growing problem. I think one of the first things that we need to continue to do more of is to make sure that the senior centers are well staffed. For too long, the social workers were being taken out of our senior centers. And they're the social workers who are most attuned to this kind of problem. They can detect the problem even if the person doesn't say anything about it. So we should not be continuing to take the social workers out of the senior centers. Make sure that the senior centers are fully funded to staff the kinds of experts that can identify these kinds of problems and to draw potential victims out so that we can get the help that they need to them. In addition, in the homes and in the communities, I think there's just a level of consciousness we have to raise as a city and as a society, that seniors, our elderly, are the ones who should be most revered. And whether it be in the family or we have a lot of seniors who live on their own, and you know, you look at the graphic images of seniors being attacked in recent years on camera. I mean, how can anybody in this city or anywhere attack a person? In some cases, you know, a couple of cases of people being in their 80s and 90s, being attacked by young people. There's a measure of respect that we have to restore in the city of New York, and that starts with our young people as well. And so whether it be programs that are funded strictly through DFTA or, again, a consciousness that should be pervasive throughout all city agencies, we need to get the respect out there, but we also need to make sure that we have the experts on the ground to identify these kinds of situations or problems so that we get rid of so that not only do we start identifying closer to 100% of these cases, but we start to cut down on the preponderance of these cases in the first place. Thank you.
You know, cutting DFTA in the light of the statistics on elder abuse is like cutting the neighborhood police department when you have an explosion of bank robberies. You can't say we care about solving this problem and then each year, year after year, repeatedly come back and say let's reduce DFTA funding. First of all, DFTA has the program specifically targeting the challenge of elder abuse. Now they're too small. But also, if a senior is going to confide in someone, isn't the place they're most likely to do it with a volunteer at a senior center or their neighbor sitting next to them playing cards? So the first thing we have to do is strengthen DFTA, not weaken it. Secondly, we have to treat these crimes the way the NYPD began to treat sexual abuse crimes when they saw instances of rape go up. It used to be back in the day, if there was a domestic violence complaint, the cops would do everything they could to kind of settle it down, so all right, everyone behaved themselves, and then they left. Then that policy changed. Whenever there was a report, they put it through the system, just to be on the safe side. It should be exactly the same way for elder abuse. And a third thing that we have to do is we have to get the banks involved. You know, if I have an expenditure and I'm visiting a relative out of town and there's an expenditure, they'll sometimes send an 800 number will come up. We see an unusual expenditure on your credit card. But how many times elder abuse happens right under the nose of the banks and they do nothing about it? They don't flag the authorities. Very often an elder finds out that it's happened only by seeing their bank statement at the end of the month. There's a lot better way to go. Believe me. with all of the checks that institutions have to know the comings and goings of funds, to know what makes sense and what doesn't. If a woman comes in who every month is depositing a Social Security check and taking out little by little just to pay her expenses, and suddenly the account gets cleaned out, stop the expenditure. Call somebody to make sure it's right. The banks need to be involved. They're not just there to make fees. They're there also to protect their customers, especially those who are older.
Mr. Albanese.
It's clear that elder abuse is growing by leaps and bounds. As I visit senior centers around the city, I hear more and more of them telling me how they've been targeted for financial fraud. It's an ongoing identity theft. All those issues have to be addressed. And you know, DFTA's been cut over the last 10 years, and everybody blames, of course, the mayor. But you know, I want to note that some of my colleagues have been part of the government for the last 15 years that are sitting up here, and it's easy to blame the mayor, but they also bear some responsibility for it. I was a school teacher for 11 years. I was a dean in a high school, and we had a protocol set up whenever we had hints of child abuse. It was set up. We called BCW. There was a real system in place, and it's still in place, to prevent that from happening. And I want to do the same thing when it comes to elder abuse. There'll be a protocol in place. I want to work with the district attorneys. There are 5 of them in the city, to have them set up some bureaus that focus on crimes that are being perpetrated against seniors in a city, so that the word will go out that if you do that, you're going to wind up in big trouble. And I'd like to have ADAs who have an expertise in this area focus on this, because it's important. And unless the word goes out that this will now be tolerated in the city, you're going to continue to see this increase, especially as the economy gets into more duress. These kinds of things go up, as well as alcohol abuse and substance abuse. We need those things addressed, and in a comprehensive way. And it's going to be like that in an Albanese administration. I can promise you that.
Thank you. We know that there's an affordable housing crisis in New York City. It seems like there's been one for as long as any of us have been around. For senior citizens, that crisis is particularly keen, and not just because they need the housing, but because as seniors age, in order to stay in their homes, they might need services. So providing affordable housing for seniors probably involves not just providing the physical space, but also the provision of services. How will your administration approach that? What realistically can the city do to provide those services? Let's start with the Catman, and we'll move down and then back from there.
Is that because you can't pronounce Katsamatitis?
I messed it up the first time, and now I'm a little gun-shy. But.
Well, I'd rather be referred to as the Catman if you can't remember my name at all. In high school, they used to call me Catsy, so I have evolved. Now, the question was, we keep talking about everything else.
I'm so humorous, it's difficult to focus. Talking about supportive services within housing for the elderly, providing not just affordable housing, but services to allow people to remain in that housing. How would you approach that under your...
Well, it's up to remain on, senior citizens to remain on their own. I guess it's up to the senior citizens themselves, and it's up to the families at what point do you go into a different situation. I mean, my father lived to be 94, 95, and at the age of 87, he came to me and said, John, I'm going to get married again. And he did get married. And I was against it originally, but it turned out to be great. He says to me, I don't want to bother you, but I don't want to be alone. And it worked out great, and he lived to about 94, 94 and a half, and everything was great. I believe we should help people stay at home if they want to stay home. We have to create a 21st century technology that the people that stay at home are able to communicate with a supervisor or something, that if they have a problem, that they're able to communicate, and whether it is hit a button on an internet or something, that they can yell out, I have a problem, I need help. That will give the opportunity of senior citizens to stay at home longer and not to go into a home. And that's what my father always wanted to do, is he wanted to stay home. He didn't, and he had his own way of doing it. And I believe we should try to help him do that, as well as be able to monitor them to help them if they need help.
Thank you. So, my turn, right? You can call me the Lou Man. In Flushing, we have one of the fastest growing senior populations anywhere in the city. I mean, it's true in a lot of places in the city, but in Flushing certainly. And we had one senior building that was being constructed, and it took about a year and a half for it to be built. And a month after it was announced, practically right after the ground was broken, there were 2,000 applications for this building that could house 110 people. 2,000 applications, and they could only house 110 people. I mean, this is a crisis in our city. We don't have enough affordable housing, particularly for our seniors. So number one, we do have to continue to help organizations and companies draw upon whatever federal subsidies there are to build this housing. But in New York City, I believe that we can use our zoning laws to spur the construction of far more affordable housing, even for seniors. And to do that, we use something called mandatory inclusionary zoning, where we basically use the economic value from our air rights to fund the affordable housing construction. And we can do that with very little outlay from the city's coffers, because the money is actually coming from the economic value that is intrinsic within our city. So mandatory inclusionary zoning is another thing that we need to tap into more to fund the construction of affordable housing. But when it comes to supportive services, there are a lot of ideas out there, ideas that, for example, we could start coordinating the services such as Life Alert through some of our senior centers so that we can get them cheaper and get them to more people. But there are even more basic things. Like, for example, services that the city has cut recently, Meals on Wheels, where a meal is delivered to the seniors, and it's a human presence that checks in on the senior in addition to providing the meal. That should be greatly expanded throughout the city. That should never have been the subject of cuts. That is not only delivering nutrition, but also potentially life-saving in cases. So we've got to expand much more of those. Supportive services don't have to be so complicated and costly. There are some very simple things that we have to remember to do, and that's exactly what I'll do in my administration.
New York City is at the leading edge of the NORC movement, naturally occurring retirement communities, because we have in many places Mitchell-Lama apartments or affordable apartments not far from hospitals, not far from senior centers, close to neighborhood shopping strips, where frankly seniors, if we give them a little bit extra help, can stay in their home longer than they ever could. Now, we do need to give them some additional help. We do have to make sure we don't close those senior centers, we don't close those hospitals, we don't do those things. But we also have to do some other things around those communities. Around those communities, why don't we do some simple things like make it a little safer for a senior citizen to cross the street? Nowadays you've got to be like Carl Lewis to get across the street with cars turning in front of you and behind you. I just biked here for my home for this stop. I'm driving along, doing my best to follow the rules in the bike lane. I see a delivery guy weaving in and out on the sidewalk. So in addition to having housing that people can afford to live in, we need to have services around them that understand seniors have slightly different needs. The second thing we need to do is develop smart housing. There's something called the 202 program. You might be familiar with it. It's dedicated housing for the seniors and disabled. They have services right there. There's smaller apartments, but it's people of like interests, like situations all around one another. Not only does that create housing for the seniors, but think about it. A lot of seniors live in bigger apartments than they really need. Their spouses passed on, their kids have moved out, so you're also creating families for neighborhood families who need that ladder of economics and the ladder of housing. And it's not that hard to do. The city provides the property, nonprofit organizations who are not out to bust the bank, they build it there. Seniors move in, you free up a bunch of apartments, everyone wins. But we won't do it unless we try, and this administration hasn't even tried.
Since we're talking about affordable housing, and this is an important forum, you have to know where people stand and what they've done about these issues over the years. Particularly, affordable housing is one of the most important issues facing the city. It's quite clear it's been eroded over the last 15 years. And I was on the city council in 1996 when I voted against vacancy decontrol, predicting that it would erode tens of thousands of affordable apartments in the city, many of them impacting seniors. My good friend there, Tony Weiner, was on the council at the same time, and he promised tenants and neighbors that he was going to vote against vacancy decontrol, and at the last minute, he turned around and voted for vacancy decontrol. While he stands up here and talks about affordable housing, let me point that out, because policies have consequences. They have consequences. Anybody can get up and make great speeches at election time and not be accountable for their past performance. But that's an important issue. It's eroded tens of thousands of affordable housing units in the city. So under an Albanese administration, I'm going to develop a comprehensive plan for dealing with housing for our seniors and all the supportive services. I think what we need to do is we can't afford to do this on a piecemeal basis. We need an overall game plan looking forward to see how we can make sure that we deal with our aging population when it comes to transportation, when it comes to safety, and all those issues. It's going to be comprehensive, and it's going to be followed up on.
Mr. de Blasio, I'm sorry. Since Mr. Albanese talked about Mr. Weiner's record, I want to give Mr. Weiner just a minute to respond.
Well, thank you. Look, I've been confronting demagogues my entire career. I'm not going to stop now, and when I'm mayor, I'm going to have to confront them. But let's remember the facts. Albany, the state legislature, has the on-off switch on all our rent regulations. If they say that we're going to not continue them at all and they completely stop unless certain changes are made, you can do one of two things. You can thump your chest, you can demagogue, or you can try to say, how do we try to save what we can? And it was true. One of the things that the state legislature said, that if you don't say to people making more than $250,000 a year, you're not going to get a rent-regulated apartment, more than $2,500 a month, you're not going to get it. I thought that if I had my druthers between no one getting any coverage and having some wealthier people not getting any more coverage, that choice is clear. But let me tell you a little bit about what this says about what kind of mayor I will be. I am going to fight every single day to make sure that Albany has no control over our fate. And when that happens, I'm going to take accountability. But when forced to sit down, just like I did, I believed in a single-payer system for our national health care. I didn't get it. But I got Obamacare, which made the life a lot better for a lot of people. And the demagogues of the world were saying you should have just taken your ball and went home. I don't roll like that. I try to get the best deal for my constituents. I'm always going to do that, and I was not going to let rent regulations lapse for millions of people in the city, and I didn't care what demagogue in a future debate called me on it.
Wait, 1 second. Hold on, Mr. Albanese. Mr. de Blasio has to leave. I want to let him respond to the question, and then I'll come back to you. We'll have like a cooling off period.
Yeah, I mean, but since we're having a discussion, I have to respond to. First of all, Anthony, you didn't get Obamacare. President Obama got Obamacare. I know you have a tendency to think the world revolves around you, but it was President Obama. Second, Anthony, you can't defend a vote for vacancy decontrol by saying you had no choice and there was nothing else we could do. It has been a huge error for this city that you and others brought us vacancy decontrol. It's been one of the reasons why we've lost a huge amount of affordable units in this city. This has been part of the decline of affordable housing in this city. So it's absolutely bull to say you had no other choice. You could have stood up and said, no, we are not going to let these units go out of affordability, not on your watch. So just own it. As to the question at hand, look, we are not going to have affordable housing for seniors if we don't fight the real estate industry in this town. Let's be clear. Some people like Anthony have deferred to the real estate industry. A lot of us have fought the real estate industry, and we've said very, very clearly, we're going to have mandatory inclusionary zoning. Let's be clear. And I agree with John Liu on this. That means you don't get to develop anything substantial in this town without a requirement that affordable housing is created in the process. We did have the 202 program. I worked for President Clinton and then Secretary Cuomo at HUD. I was the regional director of HUD. The 202 program created a huge amount of necessary, affordable senior housing. It's veritably gone now. The city of New York has to pick up the slack, requiring affordability from the real estate industry and then designating a substantial amount of that for seniors. And then you can attach services from nonprofits and from city agencies if you actually create a place where seniors can live. But so many seniors, particularly those on fixed incomes in this city, aren't able to make it, and we're not responding by providing a supply of affordable housing. In fact, the Bloomberg plan that created affordable housing didn't even keep up with all the units we lost because of vacancy decontrol and units leaving Mitchell-Lama. We haven't been moving forward. Let me finish just one point because I do have to leave. I told the event coordinators, I apologize that I do have to leave. There's another piece happening today in the fight to save Long Island College Hospital. And again, this is going to be a long, hot summer of trying to save health care for people in this city. But the bottom line is we have to demand, and I think seniors have to be in the forefront of this as people who are so deeply affected. We have to demand a new deal with the real estate industry in this town, or we should not be surprised if people won't be able to live here anymore. It's as simple as that. Thank you very, very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. de Blasio. I think we don't want to get hung up too long, but to give people a chance to respond, we'll have Mr. Albanese for 30 seconds and then Mr. Weiner for 30 seconds. Then we'll move to the next question.
But I was called a demagogue. I didn't realize that bringing up a vote that affected the future of the city's housing stock is demagogic. But beyond that, I think as mayor, you have to keep your word. You have to be true to your word. Tony Weiner lied to organizations about this bill and turned around and voted against it. He lied, as he lied about his texting scandal on CNN after that as well. So I bring this up. Whatever you think.
Okay.
Well,
I think we're gonna leave that there and let Mr. Weiner respond. Then we're gonna get back to senior policy.
Look, let me.
Quiet, everybody. Let's listen.
Let me just take a step back here and try to explain again to the person who made the charge and to Mr. de Blasio, who apparently didn't understand what was going on at the time. Look, what happens is every so often, the state legislature says we are either going to pass the continuation of rent regulation for everyone in the state, or we're not. Where we had Governor Pataki, a Republican state Senate, all they had to do was do nothing. Nothing. They didn't have to vote to discontinue it. It just would die. And it left the people with responsibility, something the Public Advocate's Office is not familiar with, since I don't know what the responsibility is of the Public Advocate. And it left us with the responsibility of doing two things. One is what Mr. Albanese suggested and what Mr. de Blasio suggested. I refuse to go forward with any modifications unless we get our whole loaf of bread. But the cost of that would have been, and that's why so many people voted for it, the cost of that would have been all rent regulations would have lapsed. It was a moment of, wait for it, Mr. Albanese, leadership. It was a chance to say, yes, I am not happy with what's going on here. I don't like it, Mr. Albanese, please. I don't like what's going on here, but that's what sometimes you're confronted with. That's why, consistently, every year that I've run, I've always chafed, and I just held a press conference on it, rolled out a plan to push back against Albany, is control of our life. They control too much of our life. I want to end it. But to say to someone that was confronted with a hard vote, who took a hard vote, maybe not getting everything they wanted, is exactly what happened during health care. Many of us believed in this room that a single-payer system like Medicare for everyone would have been the right thing. And I fought for it, and anyone who didn't notice that wasn't paying attention. But you also then have to say, is Obamacare a better solution than we have now? And you vote yes for it, and you fight for it every single day. That is often what is required when you're mayor, making those types of tough decisions. And I choose leadership over demagoguery every single time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weiner. Thank you, Mr. de Blasio. Stay out of trouble. Yes, sir. Let's move on to something that makes us all angry, which is the fact that there are benefits out there, as I think was alluded to in one of the answers to the last question. There are benefits out there for senior citizens, but there's a question about what kind of access they have to them, what kind of uptake there is. And two I'd like you to respond to, and we'll start with Mr. Liu for this question, is the Senior Citizens Rent Increase Program, or SCREE, and food stamps. SCREE has, there are issues about access to that, whether all the seniors who deserve it are getting it. And we believe that about half the seniors who are eligible for food stamps, only about half of them actually make use of that benefit. How would your administration, why do you think that is, and how would your administration change and improve access to those two critical programs?
Thank you very much. So SCREE is a program that so many senior citizens in this city rely upon. I mean, the whole point here is that rents have gone through the roof. There's another guy running for mayor. He says the rent is too darn high, okay? And he's absolutely right. And this SCREE program has been in place to help our people who are on fixed incomes. If you're on a fixed income, you only have so much to spend. You can't keep paying more and more and more for rent. And so that's what SCREE is meant for. And this is a program that I looked at very carefully as controller. And we audited the program. And what did we find? And I'm glad the commissioner is here because, you know, the department is trying to do the right thing. But we have some of these unscrupulous landlords out there that continue to collect their share of the SCREE payments even long after some of their residents have passed on. They should have known better. And we audited this and we uncovered tens of millions of dollars that was going to landlords whose tenants had passed on. Not a month ago, not a couple of weeks ago, in some cases 2 years ago. And they were still collecting those SCREE payments. That SCREE money should have gone towards seniors who actually needed it. And not only is it that almost half of the seniors who are eligible for SCREE don't get it, but I believe that the thresholds are too low. They're too low. We need to increase the thresholds. And if the Department of Finance in this city was on top of everything and not paying these payments to people who didn't deserve it, we could have increased the thresholds so that more seniors could be living more comfortably and not having to scrape month to month with increasing rents and then deciding whether to pay for their food or medicine. So under my administration, you can see an increase in the SCREE program. And I'm out of time, but on the issue of the food stamps, I think that one of the things that I would never do is criminalize people who need food stamps and start fingerprinting them, which is what this administration does. We want to encourage people to ask for the help if they need the help, and food stamps is one thing that we need to do. We also need to make sure that Congress passes reauthorizes the food stamps and increases the allowance. Anthony and I did take part in the food stamp challenge. We lived on $1.50 a meal for a week. And let me tell you something, I was glad it was over. Thank you very much.
And as you can see, it took more out of me than it took out of Controller Liu. Look, John is exactly right that the SCREE program, to be honest with you, is a real lifeline for many seniors who have it. We spent a lot of time when I was in office and helping people fill out the application. But we kind of, in SNAP and SCREE, in both cases, the city has a pretty good understanding of who's eligible. Remember, tax forms come in, a lot of information is gathered about citizens. There's no reason why the city can't send out a postcard to every person that meets the eligibility requirement on the income side and say, fill out what your rent is and we'll tell you if you're eligible for SCREE. They put too many barriers in the way. And it comes back to another thing that almost every question you can answer with this way. If we would bolster DFTA resources, you would be able to have more applications filled out at DFTA centers. Same is true of SNAP. There is no reason why. It's something that Controller Liu pointed out. We were the last municipality in the entire country that was still fingerprinting women that are trying to get food stamps for their kids. It's a sin. It's a sin. And frankly, the only reason why we don't have it has nothing to do with what Mayor Bloomberg did. Finally, the state stepped in and said, this is silly. We don't want to have this vestige of this old discriminatory policy. But if you have DFTA centers with a laptop and volunteers and a director and other people that get these programs, you destigmatize it. People are more willing to step forward. You have an afternoon, maybe every month, where people bring in their forms. The point is, DFTA is probably the most efficient provider of constituent services in the entire government. And if rather than, and in a lot of these cases like SNAP, these are federal tax dollars. We're entitled to get them back. It doesn't raise your city taxes one dime. So if we can get them for people, we make them more healthy, more sound in their home, more secure in their home, and also we wind up saving taxpayers a lot of money.
Well, I certainly agree that we need to increase the threshold for SCREA. As I said, seniors are being priced out of rental properties. They can't afford to live in the city anymore, so we've got to do more to obviously increase the threshold. We have to make sure that we build more affordable housing. I represented Bay Ridge for 15 years. We have some great senior housing built by Section 202, by Catholic Charities, did a great job, Lutheran Medical Center. We need to build more of those around the city. It's essential. I'm the only candidate who's not accepting money from real estate developers. I'm the only candidate in this race because I plan on following up and making sure we build affordable housing. We've got great examples of that around the city. We built great affordable housing in parts of Brooklyn by working with nonprofit developers. But the city provided the land and the infrastructure, and thousands of homes were built, affordable homes and apartments. We need to do that across the city because we want to keep people who grew up in the city here. And as the city becomes more senior-oriented, we need that affordable housing. And I'm going to follow up on that. Go to Washington and make sure we lobby hard for Section 202 housing. It's about priorities. Let's face it, that's what it comes down to. I mean, we should value our seniors, our children. Instead, we wind up doing things as a country which make no sense. For example, invading Iraq, which costs us $2 trillion. I mean, things of that nature have to change so we prioritize our policies in this country towards our people, building here in the U.S. and taking care of our people. That's what we need to do as a country and as a city.
Mr. Catsimatidis.
Yes, I was here early. I apologize, too. I have to leave earlier. But I wanted to be here instead of not being here. I wanted to be here to assure all our elderly friends that I am here to protect you. That's why I am not taking any money from anybody. I am spending my own money. God has been good to me. I did well in our city. And I believe our elderly should be protected. We should build more affordable housing to have better housing for our elderly. We should have a system to make sure that our elderly can get food stamps if they want them. And we should have somebody going around and talking to people and to be able to find out who is qualified and who is not getting it. I am here to serve all New Yorkers. My #1 priority, as I said before, were the elderly and our young children, that I want to give them hope. Hope that I made it from 135th Street, where I grew up. Give them hope. I made it. They could make it too. And that's my duty. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
This is like Star Search. We're slowly winnowing down to the final. Eventually, I'll be all alone up here, and then I'll tell you what I really think. This question will begin with Mr. Weiner. During and after Superstorm Sandy, there was a lot of concern about meeting the needs of senior citizens who were affected by the storm, especially those trapped in high-rises that didn't have power. One of the underlying issues, of course, is that there was an evacuation that was voluntary, and there's questions about how people were or weren't able to comply with that. How do you evaluate how the Bloomberg administration handled senior citizens in and after the storm, and how would you approach it differently if, as is almost inevitable, it happens again?
It's a great question. You say this is like Star Search. When you're doing well in the polls, it's more like Survivor. I have to tell you that in 2006, long before there was any storm, I put out a report talking about the challenges. I represented southern Brooklyn and southern Queens, the challenges that we would have if we got that 100-year storm. Talked about the challenge that when you have so many people with diverse language backgrounds, when you have so many people in high-rises, there was a proposal that seniors were expected to go downstairs in their high-rise with no power, go downstairs and grab a bus to Floyd Bennett Field, which, by the way, was under about a foot of water at the time of Hurricane Sandy. It just made no sense. Look, I, to some degree, think that one of the things that we have to realize is that these conversations that we have about government resources can't just be measured in dollars and cents on an annual budget. You can say, okay, things aren't going well, let's close down Coney Island Hospital, or let's not invest in hardening it from a storm. Well, now here it is. You didn't have the resources necessary when people needed it. We closed Peninsula Hospital in Rockaway. Closed it down. At the time, many people in this room said, well, what if there is some kind of a natural disaster? What if there's a plane crash? What if there's, God forbid, another terrorist attack? Now, admittedly, some of us said storm. We didn't think anything as big as Hurricane Sandy. And when the time came, seniors, only by the grace of God, they were trapped in their homes with no way to get out and no backup plan by either NYCHA or the city. And what happened? The city came in with giant big trucks of blankets. It didn't do anyone a heck of a lot of good. So here's what we have to do differently. One, we have to measure twice and cut once about the idea of how we're going to evacuate citizens of different types. Sure, I might be able to get up and run for the hills, but if you're a senior or disabled, you can't. So we have to do a much better census so we know where people are. When I was helping out in Rockaway and people were in these high-rises, I asked someone from NYCHA, do you know who's in the different units that might be in a wheelchair? They said, we don't really know. Yet they really do know. All the building managers know who's in their resources, so we have to do that. Second thing we have to do, we have to have redundancy in transportation. When you're relying upon just the neighborhood bus, that's not going to work. If you're relying on Access-a-Ride, well, if you're ever relying on Access-a-Ride, good luck to you, because you never know where they're going to show up. The city should have a fleet of 2,000 cabs dedicated purely for transporting disabled and seniors, and we should have them at our disposal. We should have ferries. I got $15 million of your tax dollars for the city to buy ferries. They still haven't used that money. All of these things go in the category of you plan for the worst. We've now seen what, God willing, will be the worst we're ever going to see, but we now have a template for seeing how things can be done a lot better.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese.
Well, it's clear that government didn't plan for a storm that, by the way, was predicted. 10 years ago, there was a report that predicted the storm and the consequences, and there were no hearings held. There were no plans made to deal with a Sandy-like storm. You know, 6 months before the storm, the New York Times had a front-page story. Pretty much, they were quoting a Columbia climate change scientist that predicted exactly what happened. Yet no hearings were held, no plans were made. We have a reactive form of government. We have to be proactive. We've got to think ahead. We've got to plan for the city for the next 100 years. And that includes, of course, evacuating seniors and others in high-rise facilities. And by the way, many of them are still suffering to this day. I go out to Coney Island, I go out to the Rockaways, and mold issues are still there. We still have not addressed this adequately, and I think it's a disgrace. And once again, it's lack of planning. And to his credit, Governor Spitzer, he's running for controller now, he was on television about 6 months ago, and he said, you know, I should be held accountable as well. The whole political system should be held accountable because we knew that a storm like Sandy was coming. Yet no preparations were made, and it goes to the very core of why I believe we need a proactive government. It's not politically sexy to plan for storms. You can't hold press conferences on Sunday talking about these issues, but that's what government should be doing, planning ahead for the next 100 years how to deal with these issues, and that's what I'm going to do when I'm mayor.
It is true. After Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast and New Orleans, the experts said that New York City was just as vulnerable to this kind of catastrophic storm. And people just, I don't know, they probably just felt it was too difficult to imagine, and so they didn't do anything about it. Obviously, we have learned the harsh lesson. And, you know, it's easy to do Monday morning quarterbacking and say that the Bloomberg administration should have evacuated those buildings as opposed to letting people stay. You know, I don't necessarily want to get into that. They had their decision-making points, and obviously it's the wrong decision in some of the cases. But the point is that the responses should have been far more robust to help people. We had so many thousands of people, particularly senior citizens, who were stuck in their buildings, whether it be in the Rockaways or in Staten Island or Coney Island, Red Hook, or right here in Lower Manhattan. People were stuck in their homes. They couldn't get fresh food. They couldn't get the supplies, and the cell service was down. And now there was a lot of emphasis on getting the cell service back up. That's important. But the city should not be relying on that alone. The city should have had people go through these buildings, particularly the high-rises, to check on people. We had so many volunteer organizations, and I see some of the leaders here who did go through the buildings. And I went through the buildings with them just to bring water and food up to people who still had no lights, had no power, and had no phone. But the city should have been much more proactive in coordinating the responses. When you're making a decision whether to evacuate people or not, there's pros and cons. All right, fine. We realize that some of those decisions were wrong, but then get the help to people. And that was not done quickly enough. There was too much emphasis on, for example, running the marathon or getting the cell phone signals up when the basic services were not provided. Going forward, looking forward, rationally, we have to allocate the resources properly. We do have billions of dollars of FEMA reimbursements and private insurance claims that are coming, and we need to organize and coordinate the rebuilding so that, number one, infrastructure in terms of information, communications, electrical, and transportation are able to be brought up to speed as quickly as possible after the next storm hits. And there will be a next storm. Then beyond that, we have to make sure that the structures are hardening in terms of elevating some of the seawalls and possibly building the barrier in the harbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Evacuating after or during a storm is one issue, but for some senior citizens, moving around the city, even on a good day, can be an issue. The transportation network in New York City, of course, is only partly influenced by the mayor because there's an authority in charge of much of it. How do you analyze the transportation network in New York as it relates to senior citizens? How well do you think it performs? And how would you use your power as mayor, direct power or bully pulpit power, to improve it?
Great question. I have published a comprehensive transportation plan which calls for, amongst other things, having the mayor control the transit authority. I want to be held accountable for the transit system. We have this amorphous agency called the MTA that's not accountable to no one. So I'm going to push hard for having the system under mayoral control so we can know how much money is being spent, so we can service our people here in the city. It's not really functioning as well as it could be. It's the lifeblood of the city. It's essential. It's essential for seniors. It's essential for the economy of the city, and it's underfunded by the state and the city of New York, and it's not under our control. The other thing that I would point out is that, for example, it's not senior friendly. The 86th Street in Bay Ridge, for example, they were supposed to build an elevator, so there's no access for seniors to the subway in my neighborhood. That makes no sense, and it all comes down to funding and priorities. So when I talk about a comprehensive plan for the senior population in the city, it includes transportation as well as housing. It's got to be broad in scope because seniors have to be able to get around the city, and mass transit has to be kept safe, efficient, and affordable and accessible to seniors. And that's why I've called for taxis to be accessible for seniors all over the city. They should be accessible to the disabled as well. London does it. Other cities do it. And we can do it, and it'll be a priority in my administration.
I too also believe that the so-called taxi of tomorrow under the Boomerang administration is more like the taxi of yesteryear, because so many tens of thousands of people can't use those taxi cabs. We do have to make them wheelchair accessible because, let's face it, we have a growing proportion of our population who use wheelchairs, and they should have the right to get taxi cabs anywhere as well. Beyond that, we also have the accessoride system, which we know, this is a system that we have many, many more people relying upon. And the budget for this has grown 4 times over the last 10 years. And yet, they simply don't know how to get the scheduling system down right, where people are making their appointments and in some cases waiting the half hour, they never show up, and it turns out that they're waiting around the corner in a slightly different location, or even when they get you, you got to go through 4 boroughs before you can wind up in the same borough that you were going from to. And so the scheduling and routing system at the accessoride needs to be fixed dramatically. And of course, unfortunately, it's the MTA that is responsible for the accessoride system. The MTA is a system that in recent years, there's a focus towards getting everybody into trains whenever possible. I think that's the head of the MTA calling.
Yeah, that might be accessoride
they're objecting.
outside. Thank you.
That's right. The MTA's focus has been over the last 10 years to try to get everybody on the subways. And they're trying to steer people towards the subways. They're cutting down bus service. That might work for some people, but for our senior citizens, it absolutely does not work. Many of our seniors cannot take subways. And so we have to preserve the bus service, whether it be local bus service or express bus service for seniors who need to get to Manhattan on a regular basis. We need to preserve we not only need to preserve the bus service, we actually need to expand bus service across the boroughs. Economically and transportation-wise, it's not going to be possible to increase or build new subways overnight, but we can increase bus service in all boroughs, and that is the best form of accessibility and independent transportation for many of our seniors who still want to get to and from all the places they need to get to and to continue to live independently.
I agree with Controller Liu, who, when he was on the City Council, was the head of the Transportation Committee. Really, for transportation for seniors comes in two categories. It can't get any worse, and it's about to get worse. In the can't get any worse part, we all agree accessoride has to change. I have a proposal on my website in my idea book to do that. Get rid of accessoride, replace it with 2,000 dedicated, handicap-accessible radio dispatch. You call up, you get it, the car comes. None of dealing with accessoride's bureaucracy. But there are some things that are about to get worse. You know, it's so funny. John alluded to it. You know, express buses for seniors are really a lifeline. You know, you want to go into the city, you want to have a one-seat ride, they really work. That's the one area that MTA has been slashing every single year. We've had a fight to get express bus service restored constantly. But there's also other ways it's going to get worse. Anyone here take livery cars, who live in the boroughs, take livery cars to get around? You are about to have it be much more difficult to find one, and I'll tell you why. The mayor created this outer borough taxi plan, which now means that those livery cars, which make a business responding to your calls, are going to be cruising around looking for fares. They're not going to be interested in coming to your house and bringing you shopping. And there was one check that was supposed to make sure that didn't happen. They were going to put this GPS device so that if you couldn't pick up any fares in Manhattan, quietly, without anyone really noticing, the Taxi and Limousine Commission said, never mind, we don't really need that. Now, you're going to have all of those cars flocking into the city, so in the boroughs it's going to get a lot worse. I'm going to change that program the moment I get into office. And another thing that's about to happen that is really bad, and Controller Liu alluded to it, this taxi of tomorrow is all one type of taxi, not handicap accessible. By the way, it doesn't exist yet. Not handicap accessible. I ask you this, my friends. What happens when that brand new car comes out and they have a recall on the brake liners or something? Every single cab in the entire city is going to be offline. It is, what's the Latin? It's mashugana.
We have time for one more question before we move to conclusions. And one mistake that I often make, a lot of us make when we're talking about the mature population, is to treat it as a monolith. There's old people, there's everybody else. But obviously, New York's senior citizen population is as diverse as the rest of the city. And within it are two groups that I think probably need some special attention in terms of how they access some of the services you're talking about and how they deal with some of the problems we've been trying to navigate. And they are the immigrant elderly community and the LGBT elderly community. Immigrants who are older obviously face different challenges than other immigrants because of where they are in their working and educational lives, and LGBT seniors face different challenges from other LGBT people in New York. Other than just spending more money, how would you address some of those unique challenges that face those two groups? Let's start with Mr. Liu, then Mr. Wiener, then Mr. Albanese.
These are two very important and growing communities within the city of New York. And sometimes, a lot of times, the city can't do everything. So what we need to do is rely on community-based organizations who actually have a much better track record of reaching out to these communities and effectively serving them. Now, I know we have great people at the Department for the Aging, and our commissioner here has done, in my opinion, a wonderful job in recent years. But city bureaucracies can't do everything. And so we should rely more on community-based organizations and allow them to do their job, particularly for immigrant communities and the LGBT community. These are people who don't always want to go to government. In some cases, they just outright don't trust government. But they trust some of the community-based organizations that have been doing this kind of work in the communities for many years. You know, they have language capabilities, they are more culturally sensitive, and they don't have the, the stigma of being government. And for a lot of the people in the communities, government has a stigma. So what we need to do is make it easier for these organizations to do their work, not just through funding, but allowing them to do their work instead of saddling these organizations with mountains and mountains of paperwork all the time and the bureaucracies that they have to go through. Give them the ability to do their work and provide the service that people actually need on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. Beyond that, we also have to reach out more as a city. Comprehensive immigration reform looks like it's starting to make some progress. The Senate did its part, not perfect, but far better than we have now. We need to get on Congress to make sure that the House of Representatives, to make sure that they do their part so we can finally pass comprehensive immigration reform. And I think when we do that, that will be a great thing for the country, but it'll be an even better thing for the city of New York. We will finally get the yokes of so many fellow New Yorkers off of so many New Yorkers so that they can fully participate in this great city that we have. So comprehensive immigration reform, please call your relatives from out of this state and get them to get on their Congress members to support and pass immigration reform.
You know, often when you're dealing with minority communities, whether there be minority communities in their sexual orientation, minority in their religion, minority in where they came from, the first and most difficult thing to overcome in trying to solve their challenges that they face is the stigma. And New York City actually is a remarkable example of how quickly we very often overcome stigma to try to get people the help that they need because we are so diverse. And if you look at the template that was created after the AIDS explosion, you know, outreach, information, intelligence actually solves problems. The amount of drunk driving is down. The amount of people texting while driving is down. The people having unprotected sex is down. All these things that if you educate people, they actually do try to improve their lives. They work. The problem is when you have a community of seniors who still face a stigma, who have, you know, if you think of a way that you want to communicate with someone about a program you have in the LGBT community, you're going to go to the bars they might be, you go to the cultural centers that they might be, you go to the places the magazines they might read. Yet for seniors actually have a much narrower band of activities. So the senior center, again, becomes an important place. I think doing types of advertising to outreach to seniors when you're outreaching to younger people would work. A third thing you can do, you know, we have had remarkable experiences with intergenerational transactions. When we tell seniors, go volunteers to go into our schools or in our museums and give talks about how things were in your time and also what your experiences were in the workforce, it is remarkable to see the connection they get with young people. The same thing should happen in reverse when it's issues of sexual orientation. You know, we have a lot of communities that now understand the language. They understand the notion of reducing stigma. Having younger people go in, you know, younger people, I don't mean kids, but younger people who have gone through the process of coming out, gone through the process of reaching out for services they didn't think they could before, and have them approach seniors in senior centers or in their community will melt away those stigmas pretty fast. But it comes down to a final thing, and I've just been gestured to finish. We've got to choose passive over active in these things. We know the challenge exists. It's plenty easy when someone feels stigmatized and isolated, just say, okay, that's not our problem. Government should always try to use the tools it has to solve these problems, and I think they are solvable.
New York City is a polyglot, so obviously all of our agencies, all of our CBOs should be culturally sensitive. There are people who just need to have somebody that speaks their language. And I think of I came here as an immigrant at the age of 8. My mom's 85. She goes to Regina Pace's and deals with Italian-speaking folks on issues that she has to address, and she feels comfortable there because they understand the language. The LGBT community has great CBOs, and there are other Asian CBOs in the city and other ethnic groups, and those on the ground folks should be the places where seniors can go to for assistance, especially with the LGBT community and the immigrant community. And John's right, with immigration reform hopefully someday passing, that will address some of the issues. We have 11 million undocumented folks in this city, in this country, that need help and assistance, and these community-based organizations are very effective, and we have to make sure that we adequately provide the resources for them, because they have the vehicle for communicating with folks where people feel comfortable. I mean, if you don't understand the language, you tend to stay away from services, and that is not what we want as a city. So that's an area that I plan on bolstering.
Thank you. So we've talked quite a bit about policy here this morning, which of course is wonderful, but we also, I think, want to conclude by understanding how everybody approaches these issues on a human level. Because as I mentioned in the intro, aging is one of those rare problems that literally is going to affect all of us. In 2010, when my wife and I bought a home in our Bronx neighborhood, our friends and family asked us, well, how long do you plan to have this house? And she and I looked at each other and said, well, forever. We fully intend to age in New York and end our aging here. And our friends all looked at us like we were crazy, because of course they think New York City is a miserable place to live, period, but also to get old. We know that there are disadvantages to growing old in the city, but we think there are tremendous advantages too. So in your conclusion, which we'll give you 3 minutes for because we actually have the time, tell us what you think as a person yourself who is probably going to age in New York. What do you think will be the best thing about growing old here? What do you think will be the hardest thing? And how, as mayor, will you enhance the former and try to work on the latter? Let's start with Mr. Weiner, and we'll work backwards this time.
Well, it's a great question. It harkens back to my experience as a New Yorker. I grew up a middle-class kid in Brooklyn, went to public schools my whole life. My mom was a school teacher for 31 years in the public school system. My dad went to law school on the GI Bill. Good jobs. They lived in a brownstone in Park Slope. In the 1960s, they always, whenever I talk about the campaign and I'm bragging about how smart some idea was or something, they always remind me that in 1963 they bought a limestone duplex on a park block in Park Slope for less than $50,000. So they're clearly the smart ones in the household. But I also think about the experience of my grandmother and grandfather I mentioned earlier. They lived in a Mitchell-Lama co-op. So they never got wealthy on it. They didn't cash in, but they lived in a stable neighborhood, in a stable community. They were walking distance from the services on their neighborhood shopping strip. They never had a driver's license, either one of them, and they never needed one. From living in Coney Island or living in Riverdale, next to a neighborhood shopping strip, they never needed one. That type of life that allows that type of movement around, combined with the idea that we have such experiences in New York that keep you young, even things like this. I bet you if they have a candidate forum in Des Moines, Iowa, it wouldn't be this much fun. I'm telling you. I bet you that there are cities that you can, if you had some way to measure it, that you can say having the museums, having the libraries, having the shows, having the camaraderie, having the diversity, this keeps us all a little bit younger. And so I can't imagine living or growing old anywhere else. But it's also important, and as a philosophical matter, this is what I think defines my campaign. It's also important that we don't just sit back and say it's always been that way, so it's always going to be that way. Every generation presents us with a new challenge to say, what are we going to do to leave a community, a city, better than the one that we inherited? Inherited from you. You did it. You did it for me and my wife and my 18-month-old. How do I do it for him and his kids? That's the challenge. And I think what it comes down to is when you have conversations at great civic moments like this, where we have campaigns for who's going to lead the city for the next 4 years, you have to say to yourself, what do I want that foundation of that campaign to be? I've said I want it to be ideas, not rounding up famous people, not rounding up organizations, not rounding up democratic clubs or unions. And those are all honorable people. But I want it to be about aspirational thoughts. I put out a book of 64 new ideas, a lot of them focusing on life in the city for seniors, and I'm going to keep doing that. And I can tell you, you might not turn on your TV or read your newspaper when I'm mayor and say, that guy got it 100% right, but you will know that as a middle-class New Yorker, I want to make this continue to be the capital of the middle class, not only for families, but for seniors, for children, for everyone. And I want my son Jordan to bounce his grandkids on his knee and say what you've made it possible for me to say. which is every generation has left New York just a little bit better than the generation before. I'm committed to doing that, and I want to thank you for doing it for me and my family.
Mr. Liu.